Werebeasts are some of the most feared creatures that exist on Tamriel, vicious, primal monsters that parents tell tales of to their children, scaring them into their wits so that they are that much extra cautious when roaming the wild woods. It's for good reason too. The unnatural powers of a werebeast outmatch those of their normal counterparts. A pack of wolves is scary enough for the unblooded warrior, yet a pack of werewolves is a guaranteed death for that same person. And let us not forget the hysteria that surrounds them, for werebeasts are cursed mortals. It could well be your neighbour that turns in a violent rage and slaughters half your village, and you would be none the wiser until you witnessed such transformation. So it is no wonder that many seek to hunt these vile beasts and rid the world of their filth. There are examples of skilled individuals who take on such endeavour, and there are many organisations such as the Vigilant of Stendar who would seek any Daedric influence purged from the world, including Hircine's afflicted. But if there is one faction that has a seething hatred for werewolves beyond any other, it is the Silver Hand of Skyrim. Welcome to Fudge Muppet, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Scott, and today we are going to investigate and theorize as much as we can to uncover the secrets of the Silver Hand. So no more dilly-dallying, let's get right into the good stuff. Our exposure to the Silver Hand is through the Companions faction questline in the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. They serve as the primary antagonists of the story, and surprisingly, our information on their history, their motives, and their inner workings is rather scarce, leaving many to believe that they are just simply a brood of thuggish werewolf hunters, big baddies with silver swords who just want to ruin your day. But what if you've been lied to this whole time? What if the Silver Hand are not the simple, zealous lycanthrope killers that we have been shown? Well, interestingly, as we explore all the details, we may find ourselves with a very different perspective from the conventional one. All we know is that they hate the companions and they hunt werewolves, so you being a companion and a werewolf makes you by default foe rather than friend. But how could you hate the companions? They're so honourable, and the Circle seem to use their werebeast powers in a reasonably responsible manner from what we've seen. Well, perhaps there is a different perspective on the matter. I'd suggest the primary reason they desire the companions dead, or at least the high-ranking Circle members, is because they are werewolves. Simple, right? I doubt it's the organisation of honour-bound battle brothers and sisters that causes the hatred. We also know that the companions weren't always werewolves too, and presumably in eras past, there would be no reason for the warriors of Jorvaska to be the targets of werewolf hunters. So let's have a little context here to put things in perspective. The harbinger of the companions, Kodlak Whitemane, has a few interesting things to say about the curse. He asks you if you've heard the story of how the companions became werewolves in the first place. You can mention that Skjor says it's a blessing, which he responds with,
Aye, that sounds like him. As in all matters of faith, though, the reality is more complicated than one believer would tell you.
You can alternatively say Vilkas says it's a curse, to which he responds with,
The boy has a nugget of truth, but the reality is more complicated than that. It always is.
What's interesting here is that to both assertions that the condition is a curse or a blessing, he insists that it is more complicated. We know from the events of the storyline that Kodlak Whitemane is clearly in favour of being cured, but I find it rather interesting that he doesn't just flat out agree with the curse statement, suggesting that he has some finer knowledge of what went down. When asked about the truth, Kodlak says,
The companions are nearly 5,000 years old. This matter of beast blood has only troubled us for a few hundred. One of my predecessors was a good but short-sighted man. He made a bargain with the witches of Glenmoral Coven. If the companions would hunt in the name of their lord Hircine, we would be granted great power. They did not believe the change would be permanent. The witches offered payment, like anyone else. But we had been deceived. The witches didn't lie, of course, but it's more than our bodies. The disease, you see, affects not just our bodies, it seeps into the spirit. Upon death, werewolves are claimed by Hircine for his hunting grounds. For some, this is a paradise. They want nothing more than to chase prey with their master for eternity. And that is their choice. But I am still a true Nord, and I wish for Sovngarde as my spirit home.
So what does this all tell us? Assuming a few hundred years means anywhere between 2 and 5 centuries, it would be safe to say that the Companions made a bargain with the Glenmoral Coven of Witches in the Third Era sometime. Kodlak's journal has some valuable elaboration on the matter. In my dream, I see the line of harbingers start with Ysgramor. Each of them ascends to Sovngarde until we come to Turfig, who first turned us to the ways of the beast. He tries to enter Sovngarde, but before he can even approach Sun, he is set upon by a great wolf, who pulls him into the hunting grounds, where Hircine laughs with welcoming arms. Turfig seems regretful, but also eager to join Hircine after a lifetime of service as a beast. Then I see every next harbinger turn away from Sovngarde and enter the hunting grounds of their own accord, until it comes to me, and I see Great Sun on the misty horizon, beckoning me. It appears I have a choice. From reading his journal, it seems that every single harbinger, from the first werewolf companion Turfig until Kodlak, have willingly entered Hircine's realm, indicating acceptance of the curse. Now, I can't imagine every single honor-bound companion agreed with Turfig's controversial decision hundreds of years ago, and it's the kind of fundamental disagreement that could cause a schism, a divide between warriors once brothers and sisters. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to suggest that the Silver Hand are the result of this centuries-old disagreement. Perhaps we could go as far to assert that they are actually the good guys in the story. One could even say they are the true companions. Don't worry, I'm not just making wild assertions, there is compelling evidence to back this up. Since we were just talking about Kodlak, I once again want to highlight his insistence that the reality is more complicated than it seems when speaking about their condition as either a curse or a blessing. Just to drop some honestly wild speculation before we get into the more concrete stuff, perhaps the complications refer to the schism between the companions who became werewolves and the companions who became the Silver Hand. Perhaps Turfig was already dealing with internal conflict, and taking the powers of the Werebeast were the solution to resolving the conflict, hence why it was a short-term decision that benefited them, a blessing but also a curse in the long term, not accounting for perspective. Internal conflict has been known to happen before in the Companions, such as the dark period of dishonorable usurpers around the time of Kirnil Longnose, so it's not implausible. Alternatively, the schism could have occurred after the fact, with the progenitors of the Silver Hand breaking from the Companions because, as Kodlak says in his journal, then I see every next harbinger turn away from Sovngarde and enter the hunting grounds of their own accord. Which implies that these harbingers were happy with the decision, only Turfig is identified as regretful. So when the new harbingers accepted this werebeast condition with pride, the Silver Hand could have split then. Also of note is how Kodlak's understanding of the complicated matter may be the reason he does not feel the same hatred towards the Silver Hand as the other companions do.
Your hearts are full of grief, and my own weeps at the loss of Skjor. But his death was avenged long ago. You have taken more lives than honor demanded. The cycle of retaliation may continue for some time.
It's almost as if he doesn't want to wipe out the Silver Hand because perhaps he understands their origin and he on some level low-key agrees with their anti-werewolf sentiment. Maybe I'm looking into it too much here, but he does seem to have a respect for his enemy. Unfortunately, it all comes down to hearsay in terms of the how and when they split from the Companions, but there is fortunately compelling evidence for the Companion-Silver Hand connection. For starters, we have to acknowledge their peculiar obsession with Wuuthrad. Why? We know the Companions have a particular reverence for Ysgramor and that Wuuthrad is his legendary axe. We also know that the Silver Hand, despite being werewolf hunters, dedicate a huge amount of resources and manpower to finding the shards of Wuuthrad. One of the first quests for the Companions is Proving Honor, where you are told that a scholar has identified the location of some remnant of Wuuthrad in a place called Dustman's Cairn. When you arrive there with Farkas, he remarks,
"Looks like someone's been digging here, and recently. Tread lightly."
And upon further exploration, we find that the Silver Hand got here first, and seemingly they were the ones that had been digging, looking for Wuuthrad. This is where you first witness the Companions as a werewolf, and of note here is what the Silver Hand say.
It's time to die, dog. We knew you'd be coming here. Your mistake, companion.
Which one is that?
Doesn't matter. He wears that armor, dies.
That armor is referring to the signature wolf armor of high-ranking Companions. Now it is clear that they are out for the Companions, and as they said, they knew you'd be coming. You may just dismiss this whole thing as a ploy to catch a werewolf, but as you do find out as you progress the quest, the Silver Hand were here digging for the shards of Wuuthrad which you retrieve. I mean, if they really wanted to just set a trap for the sake of killing a companion, they could have faked the whole thing by paying a scholar to give fake information to the Companions, sending them anywhere they wanted. But to me, the fact that they were digging indicates they were actually trying to find the shards. So I figure they just knew the Companions would have heard the same information they did and prepared accordingly. You'll also notice a very particular and peculiar thing when you loot the bodies of the Silver Hand. You may notice that they have a very high chance of carrying a volume of the Songs of Return. To be exact, there is a 7.5% chance of them having a book, and of that there is a 73% chance that the book they possess is one of the Songs of Return, and the other 27% chance being a lycanthropy book. For those unaware, the Songs of Return are the legendary tales of Ysgramor's return to Skyrim after the Night of Tears, denoting his legendary feats of conquest. So while some may say the Silver Hand seek out the fragments of Wuuthrad purely to spite the Companions, I just don't believe it. The prevalence of the Songs of Return in their inventories leads me to believe that they have a special reverence for Ysgramor like the Companions do. And to that you may say, well, Ysgramor is a popular guy, he's important to all Nords. True. But what about to the Orcs? What about to the Khajiit? What about Dark Elves? Or all the other races the Silver Hand includes? Clearly to me, without some cultural bond, these individual races would have no reason to revere Ysgramor, especially since he has nothing to do with the werewolf hunting. Some people reported online that the Silver Hand can even shout the line "Ysgramor would be ashamed of you" during combat, but I've had a hard time trying to get them to say it, so it's either a really rare line or a misheard quote, but if true, it only further emphasizes their reverence for Ysgramor. Pretty much most interaction with the Silver Hand is related to Ysgramor's axe. The amount of manpower they have devoted to this cause surely would be better put to use hunting down more werebeasts, but that's assuming that that is their main prerogative. In actuality, if you look at the questline, most of the Silver Hand related objectives are concerning Wuuthrad. Even in Dustman's Cairn, the primary objective seemed to be to acquire the shards. Even the assault on Jorvaska comes into question because yes, they may have killed Kodlak, but they seem to have quickly nicked the fragments of Wuuthrad and left. This to me all infers the idea that the Silver Hand are related to the Companions in some way, or that they were once Companions generations ago. It explains the importance they place on Ysgramor. Like I said before, a schism of the Companions who remained true and honoured Ysgramor's life versus falling to the corrupting influence of Hircine. Because all we can really say for sure about the Silver Hand is that they hate werewolves and they love Ysgramor, or at least they love the books about him, and if you put two and two together, it ends up making a lot of sense. Now, if you choose to accept this evidence and dance with the idea that the Silver Hand were a splinter faction of the Companions from centuries ago, then maybe they don't seem all that bad. There are a few major things that I want to address, things that people like to point out to dismiss them as a bunch of evil baddies. The first thing is that they're essentially just bandits with silver swords, but I think this is far more a result of Bethesda giving them the default bandit armors instead of something unique. In vanilla Skyrim, they do just look like generic bandits with silver swords, but add a mod like Nord War UA's unplayable faction armors, and they look like this, and suddenly the whole bandit vibe starts to disappear. They seem more like a distinct faction of professional werewolf hunters. Essentially, just because someone wears the same fur armor as other bandits doesn't make them a bandit. Then consider that these bandits also seem to love the Songs of Return and are obsessed with retrieving the fragments of Wuuthrad. Overall, they start to feel less bandity. You don't necessarily see them on the side of the road holding up people for their money. The other thing mentioned is the Silverhand's employment of torture against people in their quest for purging Skyrim of Werebeasts. If we were to use torture as an indicator of evil, then most of Skyrim's factions are evil. Look at the Dawnguard, look at the Imperials, look at most whole dungeons. I think the fact of the matter here is that the world of the Elder Scrolls is not the 21st century, and it doesn't have a concept of war crimes. I mean, this is a universe where the Empire mandates guilty until proven innocent, and it's not like the Companions are the holy grail of morality either. You get paid to be essentially just a hired thug and go beat the hell out of someone without even knowing what for. You're just a mercenary. And the final thing that I tend to see around that supposedly damns the Silverhand to evil status is that they hunt werewolves, but some are peaceful. I mean, sure, some are, but the fact is most aren't, otherwise they wouldn't have that reputation of supernatural cursed violent beasts. Sinding, for example, is clearly regretful and dislikes his status as a werewolf, but even still he lost it and killed a little girl. Now, while he didn't intend to kill her, the world is changed by actions, not intentions. The fact is, two parents no longer have their daughter because she was killed by a frenzied werewolf. The Companions themselves revere the power because of its capacity for violence, and werewolves you find in the wild are all hostile. Funnily enough, at your first turning, you may go on a bounty-free rampage of Whiterun and even kill a bunch of innocents, and Aela has nothing to say about it except that you gave them more trouble than Farkas. Granted, it depends on what you do as a player, but the whole interaction seems to imply some degree of violence. Simply put, I'm not going to place Werewolf Hunters in the morality bad box because some werewolves could be nice, in the same way I don't put the Dawnguard in the morality bad box because some vampires are nice. Like Codlac Whitemane says, it's more complicated than that. I actually find that quote quite applicable to this scenario, and I do like that it recognizes there is more nuance to most situations. It's all about perspective, because let's face it, we really only think the Silverhand are bad to begin with because you're a companion on the other side of the conflict. But imagine you went to Skyrim and you just hear about a faction of werewolf hunters who revere Ysgramor. Evil isn't the first thing that comes to mind. Now, of course, just because they're not bad doesn't mean they're entirely good either. I'm sure plenty of them relish in their zealous hatred of werebeasts inflicting great suffering upon them. Characters such as Krev the Skinner come to mind, but still, there are people of all factions on all sides of conflict who thrive in violence. But from an idealistic standpoint, there is nothing particularly bad about them. If Skyrim had 0 werebeasts, it would be safer and more peaceful. I'm sure even characters like Sinding would agree. He never would have killed the girl if it were not for the beast within him. It just so happens that Codlac Whitemane himself agrees with the premise, and he relates more to the Harbingers of old who found glory in Sovngarde versus the Harbingers that preceded him and chose the hunting grounds of their own accord. It's unfortunate that the Silverhand were his default enemies because Codlac would have agreed with the idea that the Companions should not be werewolves, and if the Silverhand were a splinter group of Companions, he would likely agree with the true to Ysgramor type sentiment, though as it was, the Silverhand and the Companions weren't on speaking terms, and unfortunately the Silverhand assault Jorvaskr and kill Codlac because in their eyes, he is a werewolf and a harbinger just like the ones of previous years who enjoy the form of the beast. They had no way of knowing his personal quest for a cure. From a Silverhand point of view, if you buy this theory, they are on a quest to recover the pieces of Wuuthrad, preserve the true way of the Companions, and destroy the werebeast filth, for they witnessed how it corrupted such a proud group of warriors. It's also highly possible that centuries ago, when and if a schism in the Companions happened, that the progenitors of the Silverhand were not at first a group of werewolf hunters, but just rather ex-companions who disagreed with Turfig's way. Perhaps over time they developed into the Silverhand they are today, and at that they may have degenerated into a more thuggish group. Consider that there are many Silverhand members, and they would eventually have to recruit externally to build such numbers, and some could argue that they recruit more types prone to violence and banditry. But the prevalence of the Songs of Ysgramor and their actions concerning Wuuthrad leads me to believe otherwise. I don't think they are mere bandits with silver swords. Overall, the fact that Codlac describes a complicated matter concerning the story behind the Companions accepting the beast blood, the fact that these werewolf Werewolf Hunters are all obsessed with Ysgramor's axe and recovering its shards, as well as the fact that they carry books that write of his legend, lead me to believe the theory I stated at the beginning of the video. I think the Silver Hand were a splinter faction of the Companions that arose from the controversial decision of the Harbinger to accept a pact with the Glenmoral Coven, turning them into werewolves. Unfortunately, the big real truth is that the Silver Hand is rather underdeveloped. We know pretty much nothing about them for sure, there's barely any named individuals, and ultimately the existence of these breadcrumbs scattered about, which we use to theorize, leads me to believe that the original intention of Bethesda was to have a deeper exploration of the Silver Hand, but that's just my speculation. Imagine how awesome it would have been if you had the opportunity to decline the Werebeast blood, and you are approached by a secret member of the Silver Hand who encourages you to meet with him, and you learn of the Companions' past, then you learn of the Silver Hand's leader, and you learn about their organization committed to preserving the true spirit of Ysgramor's companions and also thwarting her scene at every turn. Then later down the line there could be some real difficult choices, but it could be possible to join the Silver Hand and help them reclaim Jorvaska, or accept the Beast Blood and side with the current Companions. It'd be a tough choice too, especially with the Companions having such likable characters like Farkas and Aella. What could have been? But regardless, what did you think of the Silver Hand theory? Do you believe the founders of the Silver Hand had anything to do with the Companions? Why else would they have this particular fascination with Ysgramor? Why else do they delegate so much manpower to the pursuit of Wuuthrad, a goal mostly unrelated to werewolf hunting? Let me know your thoughts and theories down below. I love doing deep dives like this into the lore, trying to see what we can investigate and extrapolate. Like the video if you enjoyed it, it really helps us out. Thanks so much for watching. My name is Scott from Fudge Muppet, and I'll be back to nerd out with you again next time.